All right. Welcome back to the Driveline R&D podcast. We got another special guest for y'all, Stephen Sutton Brown, natural phenom Steve, Twitter
Go.
famous, uh, ready to chop it up about a whole bunch of stuff. Very eager to have you and welcome aboard, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for having me on this. I'm pumped for it.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about a lot of things. Like I said, specifically not going to talk about the Atlanta Braves at all because pretty bleak situation over there. But something that's not bleak is no hitters. We got Jack and Josh on here like always, and Josh coming off a fresh combined no hitter. Exciting stuff.
Yeah, do not look at the box score. Do not realize that it was only a 7-inning game. I also only threw one of those 7 innings, so it's not, it's okay. But we got a great start from our starter, and then another quality inning from another reliever, and yeah, we no hit the Wilmington Blue Rocks on, I believe that was Thursday.
Blue Rocks.
Not sure what a Blue Rock is, but
yeah. You actually got one up last night. I think somebody threw a combined perfect game, I believe.
I did see that. Yep, combined 9-inning perfect game too, which was it actually is it's a real one. So.
Yeah.
Is that the first combined no hitter you've been a part of?
This first one in college or pro ball. In high school, we had obviously 7-inning games. Our high school league in Michigan, because it was so cold, started every count with a 1-1 count because we were trying to get doubleheaders in.
That is wild.
And so I threw a 42 pitch no hitter, 7 innings. That averages six pitches per inning, 2 pitches per batter. So that's obviously the highlight of my career, but also a 7-inning no-hitter, but I actually threw all 7 innings.
Rename the Maddox to a Heshka.
Yeah.
If anyone
the
can
Catholic,
go sub
Catholic
50.
League high school league in Michigan is a little like out there. I think it was I thought it taught hitters and pitchers both how to be a little bit more aggressive, which was cool. But I know like high school guys who get drafted out of that league, one of the knocks on their scouting report is we don't know if this guy can basically go deep into counts or not because we've never seen him have to deal with like a real 4-3 count. It's pretty interesting.
That is wild. So are you a
don't
legend?
give Manfred any ideas.
What'd you say, Lambo?
You got to be a legend in that league. A 42 pitch no hitter, I don't care the rules, is just like, that's like the type of thing your grandpa will tell you, and you'll be like, yeah, all right, grandpa, let's get you back to the home.
I've been long since forgotten, don't worry. Long since forgotten.
I'm gonna track down the high school. There's gonna be like a whole plaque and everything.
Yeah.
Our high school actually did not have did not have a grass infield or a fence, so I'm not sure there's gonna be any plaques there either.
Midwest baseball is different, man.
Yeah. But this is the only baseball talk of the podcast. We're actually going to talk to Steven about his day job at GM instead of baseball. So we're just going to talk
honestly,
about
let's kick it off there, man. Tell us about what you do and how you balance it with your baseball prospectus workload.
Yeah, so I'm a senior systems engineer in drive quality at General Motors. So I'm part of a group that my focus is on taking customer feedback about what they like or don't like about how their car drives, and turning that into our engineering metrics and requirements and processes and everything. So don't do a lot of on the execution side, more on the process side, which is a lot of fun. Have been poking around with baseball stats off and on since college. Got into it from one of my fraternity brothers was into advanced stats. He got me into it. And then like my senior project in one of my CFD classes was like on pitch movement, stuff like that. That was my first interaction with Alan Nathan. He's heard that I was doing CFD on baseballs, and when he found out that I was modeling it as just a smooth sphere, he like, you could sense the disappointment. He thought that I had like a whole seams and everything model. It was not that. Got into it with that, and then had some community stuff published on Fangraphs, and then fell out of it for a while until I started back in this job. I needed to learn Python for my current role at GM, and some of the new StatCast stuff was ramping up more, so saw it as an opportunity to kind of do both at the same time. Started seeing y'all's stuff models, and then also pitching bot and max base stuff plus at the same time. And I was honestly just kind of like, I wanted the data, but nobody had it publicly at the time. So I figure all those things came together real well, learned how to make a pitching model, and that kind of transitioned me into my current role at Beat Pro. They were looking to roll one out themselves, so they reached out to me to develop Pitch Pro, Stuff Pro, our new pitching and stuff models, and that's kind of how that got started. So now doing that in my free time in the evenings, and the latest updates have been the Arsenal metrics that we rolled out the introduction to. We're still working on getting them on the player cards and leaderboards, so be on the lookout for that. But yeah, just kind of doing both right now.
We respect for all the part timers out there. Those guys are the grinders and the heart of public baseball research. So,
Right.
Are you talking about yourself, Marek?
okay, so you
You're
mentioned stuff. Well, I'm talking about you too. You know, you're a part timer at the moment. So yeah. Everybody but Lambo, basically.
Yeah, suck it,
Um,
Lambo.
But all right. Well, speaking of stuff, bro. I mean, one thing that everybody does with their the stuff leaderboards every season is kind of recalibrate the things that stand out in their model versus everybody else's. You guys tweet out pitch of the day every day using Stuff Pro. It's a fun follow. But do any pitchers or pitch types stand out in Stuff Pro relative to what you see? Maybe ours or other stuff models grade out really favorably.
Uh, the latest updates to a lot of the models have kind of converged more than in previous years. Stuff Plus recently got an update as well. And a lot of them now are really kind of the industry as a whole has converged on a number of things. I would say one thing that I am really proud of that we worked a lot on last year was improving how well the model does with smaller sample pitches and specifically on like splinkers, where
Mhm.
splinkers came kind of to the forefront last year and were such a pain for the model at the time. And so with the off-season update, got a lot better performance there that I'm really happy with. And then also on changeup specifically, I haven't checked for Stuff Plus and Pitching Bot, but I can say with the new Stuff Pro updates, changeups are not as far off and difficult as they have been in the past. I think there's still some weird ones out there. I think just in general, these models have a hard time with outlier stuff, and sometimes changeups can just kind of be weird and very unique. But definitely the models have gotten a lot better, and I don't think it's as fair to say anymore that you can just kind of ignore stuff models on changeups until 1,000 pitches or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
Who
it.
are our Splinker guys? Just really quick. I mean, it's a short list. So, was it Soriano, Skeens, and Duran? Is that basically it?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think Ben
and
Joyce had one.
Who did?
yeah, but I don't think he uses it a whole lot. I have to double
Mhm.
check. I have to look.
That's a pitch to tap into for my money. But anyway, Lambo, you were asking something.
No, I just think it's yeah, interesting the small sample pitches. Like right now I'm very interested Jamie Arnold probably going to be drafted very high. Like what models are going to say about his changeup because I don't know if you've seen. I think we posted a video of him training in gym. He's literally throwing a like right-handed slurve. Like it's a low spin rate, uh, movement profile similar to Devin Williams, but from a low slot lefty. Um, and something like that, I think could be very elite against right-handed hitters. But I have no idea what each of the team's internal models are going to say about it because, yeah, I think it's one of the most outlier pitches I've ever seen.
I think something in recent years, some of the earlier stuff models, I don't, not y'all specifically, but some other ones that I've seen, there was more of a, it was early, we're still kind of figuring things out, and there's kind of like an urge to toss a lot of stuff in and just kind of like see what comes out. I think the industry as a whole has gotten more careful about not giving these models too much, because one thing that we found
Mhm.
is boosted tree models in general can be prone to overfitting and they will kind of figure things out whether you put them in or not. Um, and so I think as a whole, we've done our due diligence on simplifying the inputs and trying to find ones that have a real direct causal relationship to pitch outcomes. And I think that by doing that, it's made them a little bit more robust to some of these outliers, because even the outliers, there's some trends there that maybe it's not like it has a similar shape to other pitches, but there's some combination of qualities that are captured by some of the other inputs. And by simplifying things, sometimes the model can honestly have an easier time with weird stuff.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed the overfitting, even with some of the models I've come across from teams, for example, where two pitches that are very, very similar in both shape, movement, release point have drastically different stuff grades. And I think even if maybe it's technically performs slightly better, like I think that's really confusing for both the athlete and the coach, and obviously throughout the pitch design process, like that's not very helpful as well if you have like very subtle, like it's almost like it's like the chaos theory of pitch design, right? Like if the stuff grade that you're getting is extremely sensitive to the initial conditions, that's not going to be very intuitive or actionable from my perspective. I think when we were going through the stuff model redesign, and we kind of went to this component based approach, we noticed that we got actually pretty good results on basically all the components. Balls in play are by far the biggest challenge. I'm not sure if you had any thoughts on like potential ways that balls in play, especially, we can potentially model them in a different way or a better way than kind of the current paradigm. I know we have some thoughts as well, but just wondering if you've thought about that problem yourself.
Constantly. I think something we'll get into later. I think having some of the new backtracking data to better understand like how batters are missing on different pitches, where they're kind of mishitting it, I think that will help a lot. I think the latest Stuff Plus update had some interesting stuff with how they are predicting balls in play. I know that's something that Eno has touted that they're proud of. We've been very happy with our approach. So we first fit a 3D WOBA model on spray angle, launch angle, and batted ball exit velocity. And then we use a linear model to predict the outcome of that for a pitch. And that works really well. It comes with its own set of pros and cons. One thing I will say here is what works best is also going to depend on the application. And I know when we're looking at player evaluation, our overriding goal, right, is best predicting the outcomes of these pitches. But there are, well, for the pitcher, I would say, and separating the variance at the pitcher level from the pitch level. However, I would say from a team standpoint, there are other applications where I'm okay with overfitting on pitch results and underfitting on like the pitcher if I can better predict that specific pitch. Like if I'm trying to come up with defensive positionings and I want a really good model on where a ball is going to be hit, even if I lose some ability to predict pitchers, but I gain some ability to predict precise batted ball outcomes, I'll take that trade-off. So I think that's some of the next steps is really understanding like where some of those trade-offs are. The last thing I'll say there is one of the reasons batted balls are difficult is a lot of our models assume a normal distribution of errors, and that is not the case for batted balls. A home run is worth a lot more than a single, for instance. And so some of those effects are nonlinear. And also the models right now assume some mean outcome for each of these. But one thing that we haven't looked enough at in our stuff models is the value of variance. If I throw a ball 2 feet outside, that's a bad pitch, but I know there's a very small window of outcomes there. It's either going to be a hit by pitch or a ball, and that's it. Whereas like some of these balls in play, it may have like a low expected value, but there's a chance it goes out. And right now our current stuff models don't handle that variance really well.
This is the official push to add error bars to predictions. We've been saying it for a while. That'll probably be coming this offseason for us.
Yeah. I think it would help us nail down some of the guys like Blake Snell too, where if you look at the expected value of his pitches, it looks like, he's giving up a lot of ball. I had that piece about that where he was giving up too many walks and he should be challenging guys in the zone. But there's something to be said there where you have these lower variance outcomes, and like maybe sometimes he gives up a bunch of walks, but he's very rarely going to give up the long ball. So maybe there's something to that the current models don't capture well.
I will say the
Yeah,
way we have talked about it internally is making the heat maps relative to pitches that are at least going to have a 25% chance of a swing, just because our trainers care more about like, yeah, I know the predicted run value is lower if I just throw the pitch out of the zone, but what I care about is the run value when I'm challenging guys in the zone. I'm just going to assume that I've mediocrely executed this pitch. So those are the values I care about.
Yeah, it does seem a little ridiculous to like that the standard has been basically these point estimates on something as, especially like for ball and play models, right? Like it just seems like it's very it's very overly reductive, and I think there's a lot of potential to increase public understanding if we kind of say like, here's the actual, for this pitch, here's like the variance of like the outcomes of this pitch. But even on the pitcher level, right? Like, oh, this guy's stuff on the season has been like 110, but like, can we actually, like, how close is that to stabilization? Like, what is even a stuff plus of 110? Like, what does that even tell us about like what his expected future results are? Because, you know, stuff plus of 110 doesn't guarantee an ERA plus of 110. So just like kind of putting these numbers in a little bit more context, I think would help increase public understanding a little bit better than we currently do.
Agree.
And I think with balls and play models too, I think something that I've thought about, I think Tango has talked about this a little bit too, but like exit velo, I think like a very low hanging fruit in my opinion is like exit velo relative to the batter rather than like if I give up a 90 mile an hour and especially in like the training sets, if I give up a 90 mile an hour, or let's say I give up a 100 mile an hour ball in play against Giancarlo Stanton versus Luis Arias, like that's very different in terms of like what actually happened there. Like Arias barreled that pitch, Stanton maybe mishit that pitch. So I think a very low hanging fruit is something along those lines. I know we've also talked about like some kind of maybe Bayesian approach where we kind of like seed the model with some sort of like expected launch angle distribution based on the pitch location, just to kind of like give it a little bit more context as to like what actually is expected here. And then the batter would be like some difference. And instead of speaking of like absolute terms, it'd be like relative terms, like you're X% more likely to get a ground ball than expected here, or X% more likely to get a fly ball, something along those lines.
Even there, you might be projecting a little bit because Stanton and Arias, we think of their mean exit velos in a certain way, but I don't know anything about the variance of Arias's exit velo profile. Maybe he's got some juice in there that comes out every now and then. So
fair point.
Even didn't Jonathan Judge do a great piece on exit velo distributions, basically addressing that point, Marek?
Yeah,
Maybe.
We've got some code posted for R and Python. A little plug there. So we found that exit velocities follow a skew normal distribution, and there's definitely more work that we can build off of that. One of the things that is tough about where we're at with a lot of these pitch models, but player models in general, is some of the early work you could kind of handle on your desktop PC, your laptop. We are getting to the stage where a lot of what's left can be very computationally expensive. And you have to think not just about like how to approach the project analytically, but you have to think about like how to approach it computationally as well. And that becomes like a tough thing for, especially when you start talking about building them into Bayesian models and like that, the skew normal model that I ran in Python for that takes a while. It takes a ton of resources. There's a chance that it crashes. So there's definitely more to be gained there, but it just takes time and it can be expensive.
Is this the place to plug the Hyperion machine that we have at Driveline?
I was going to say we have an anonymous big leaguer who, in exchange for a little money off his training plan, traded in his gaming PC that he had picked up because he was going to become a streamer, and that never caught on. So
that is amazing.
There is someone out there who is supplying a lot of our resources that we use internally.
That's awesome.
I also think, to your point, I know Bodie made a recent a tweet or Twitter thread basically about like it's not enough often to like be a data analyst. Like you have to have you have to like approach problems with a data engineering mindset also. Whether that's like building things and like being able to turn them into systems and like making sure they're actually usable. And even things like what you're talking about, like how do you actually like, if you have this great idea for a model, but you can't computationally like build it because it's so complex, or you don't know how to make it more simple, like it's not really useful at that point. So I think having this like wide toolbox of tools is very valuable. And actually that I wanted to ask you this question. Do you think there's like things you do in your day-to-day job, your full-time job, that have allowed you to approach your work in baseball a little bit differently, maybe with a different mindset, or potentially some skills you've picked up along the way that have helped you approach your work at B Pro?
There's been a few things. I'd say on the computational side, a lot of our data sets are a lot smaller. So I actually have a much easier time with that with my day job. The biggest things that have influenced me, just in general, engineering comes with a very mechanistic understanding of things. And I think if your background is more strictly statistics, a lot of those relationships feel a little bit more fuzzy. And so when I started learning about more causal models and inferences, that idea of like something being more direct, like sounded like music to my ear. It was like made stats make sense more. And I think that's been helpful for a lot of my work is I try to like in our world, we talk about like when we build models or different control systems, we really try to think about like what's the physics of what's happening here. I try to do that with my baseball work as well. Really think back to like what is the data generating process? How is how are these results being formed? And then starting from there. The other thing that my current job has helped me with tremendously is kind of dealing with ambiguous feedback. So customers, no offense to y'all are not very good at describing what's wrong with your cars and what you like or don't like. And that's the like type of survey data we have a lot of times. And so you're trying to kind of like use both the data that you have on this vehicle and this kind of vague customer feedback where they were angry filling out a survey or excited filling out a survey. Like no one's neutral filling out a survey, for instance. And you got like one little sentence and you're trying to figure out what they were talking about in the data. That plays directly into baseball because unless you're plugged in with a team and can really like dive in, you're looking for these little nuggets in different interviews or different things that they say or different cues that they do where they may not actually be describing exactly what they're doing. Like we talk about the old school feel versus real. There's a bunch of drills where like a player would say, I'm swinging down the ball or whatever it may be, where that doesn't match what's actually happened, but they are describing something. Like it's not enough to discount that and be like, oh, they don't know. They do know what they're talking about. They're just using a language that may not, play nicely with the data at all times. So there's a lot of my baseball work where I'm trying to read between it. It's like, okay, I know what he said about how he approached this guy, but what does that actually mean? What is that, when I get into the data, what am I going to see that backs up these things that he described in this interview?
What I was going to say is I think the part you make in the first part, which I think is, if I'm understanding it correctly, I think is basically it's not enough to just basically have a model or have some sort of like kind of like perceived reality. You have to understand the underlying mechanisms that actually like are at play. And I think that's especially true in like physical engineering. Like you have to understand the actual physics or like the mechanism by which something happens, or else you're going to basically come to potentially wrong conclusions, or like you're going to like find something that's like tangential to like what's actually happening, but like there's actually some confounder or like something else that's actually the underlying principle of like why something is happening, which is obviously something that I think is really important. Sorry to cut you off, Marek.
No. Can you launch from that right into what you were thinking about on batter perception, or what realizations you had around this notion that we built a lot of assumptions around Arsenal models, and we'll obviously talk a lot about that here. That anchor on what we think a batter's decision point should be, or like what a reasonable expectation or assumption of a decision point might be, because from there we index movement past the decision point as one way of index to the decision point and look at movement past that as like a key descriptor of like arsenal size. But recently, Heshka, you've been sharing a lot of thoughts about like the flawed approach there, or how we should marry, true understanding of mechanics of hitting and physical perception to modify how we think about decision points in our models.
I do think we need to have Clayton Thompson on at some point, because this is something that he's been doing a great job leading here at Driveline, is our motor learning book club, kind of just like understanding what's actually happening when skill acquisition happens, and even is skill acquisition even a thing? Like, is it possible to acquire a skill? In reality, it's more likely that you're just attuning your skill for the context and environment that you're putting it in. But this concept of a decision point is a little bit at odds with what's actually happening in the batter during a swing. And so I think that's like an important thing, kind of in line with what Stephen was just talking about, and like this idea of like understanding the actual underlying mechanism of like what's happening. The batter is basically swinging. Like, the batter swings no matter what, starts his swing no matter what. The actual decision is whether to stop his swing. And even as he begins his swing, he's consistently taking in new information from the environment, and he's adjusting his swing. So it's possible that when he first starts his swing, he thinks it's going to be a fastball, but the best hitters are able to pick up constant information from the ball flight and essentially adjust their swing and still hit a pitch that is not a fastball. It's still something I'm learning a lot about, and I'm trying to wrap my head around. Clayton, like I said, might be someone that we should have on the podcast. But I think just like there are some flawed assumptions, but I think the important thing more than anything is acknowledging some of these assumptions that we are making in our models, and acknowledging some of the limitations of the models that we're making. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that, Stephen.
Yeah, I 100% agree with all that. And there's a couple things to go there. One, to your point, this is a dynamic event that we are using discrete data and discrete descriptions to kind of talk about. So we talk about swing versus no swing. We talk about like their tilt, but all of those, as you said, that's all changing in real time. And so how that looks is, kind of how the bat ends up is not necessarily where they intended when they started, and how they got to where they ended up can be batter dependent as well. I tweeted about this recently, that clip of Juan Soto dropping down to get a ball. Adrian Beltre and his one knee homers is something that like haunts me constantly, where, we have these models of like where we thought the pitch and where we think the batter expected the pitch based on their swing dynamics. But we don't know, like, this guy may tilt more, this guy may drop down, this guy may pause a little bit in his load. And going back to the point earlier about like dealing with the ambiguity, hitters aren't just going to say that. Like, no one's just going to say like, oh, my timing mechanism is I pause once I get my toe down. And then they're not just going to say how they do that. There's some like videos of Josh Donaldson that I go back to a lot, where he was in the booth talking about a lot of what he does. And you can kind of like tell how far he's willing to go in those discussions to say like, what mechanistically is he actually adjusting, and how is he setting his body up to be dynamic. So yeah, I agree with all that. It's really, really tough. A little bit more background there, I guess, on what we've been working on. So we've been working, the new data that we have is swing path, tilt, attack angle, attack direction, and then we get the X and Y intercept point. So that's the X is going to be in front of to behind the batter. Y is going to be from batter to the pitcher. We can kind of see where the intercept point was. And that's helping us. The idea is for a given pitch, velocity, location, a batter is going to have some ideal swing that they are looking for. And so if we create a model of like what their ideal swing looks like on those pitches, we can then look at deviations from that to say, oh, typically they tilt this much on that pitch, but they actually tilted this much, so they must have been under it. Same thing with like your intercept point. They typically contacted here, but the intercept point was way out here. They must have been way ahead of it. So all that stuff tends to kind of work. I'm seeing some like good signaling. Alex Chamberlain had a really good piece at Fangraphs looking at implied miss distance from that's had some good results there. Everything's directionally correct, but the error bars are huge, and I think a lot of it goes back to like just what you're saying. We're looking at this tiny snapshot in time, and we just don't have the full picture of the swing. We don't know how they adjusted, when they adjusted, stuff like that. So a lot of it's just kind of like feeling around in the dark a little bit, not completely in the dark, but kind of feeling around, seeing what makes sense, and just humbly knowing that like we are not going to get this perfectly fit model. We're going to get stuff that's directionally correct, and that's going to tell us we're on the right path, but we might not get like fully there with the data that we have.
And for that analysis, you were looking at barrels and imputing the swing characteristics for the batter's like best swing along these dimensions. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. So I fit the model on barrels. I take out all the barrels hit in a given season, and then look at the two models, well, three that I mainly work with are tilt, y-intercept, and bat speed. And so for a given pitch location and velocity, I know what those three characteristics typically look like. And then again, I just infer differences from there. And those models are set up slightly differently. Like I don't have velocity in the swing path tilt model because I don't think velocity is going to impact that much since they're taking tilt through the whole swing. But anyhow, that's kind of the gist of it, how those are structured. And then it's a Bayesian model, so it's got some ability to handle small sample guys. But we fit on barrels and then look at all the rest of the swings and kind of check the deviations from that to kind of try to get an idea of what they were expecting or swinging toward.
Yeah, I saw that. I really like that tweet because one, direct, like you said, even if there are things to filter here a little directionally, it made a ton of sense. I mean, there's one column in your viz here that describes the y-intercept error, so whether or not a batter was ahead or behind relative to their best swing, and you look at the off-speed pitches and understand that okay, it shows that batters are typically ahead relative to their best swing on off-speed pitches. That kind of gives me confidence on how I'm evaluating the rest of these results. So one, that would really interested me, and then two, there's a tendency, or at least the laziest forms of hitter modeling, lazy forms that I'm guilty of as well, assume that the A swing is like the fastest swing that a batter has. And between seeing this and then Scott Powers published, I don't know if it's an update to what he did at Saber Seminar, but he published a paper. Him and Ron Yurko worked on the swinging fast and slow concept. Same idea, I believe, where they took barrels or like the best contact to impute a guy's best swing that weren't necessarily, just a function of bat speed being the A swing here. Have you looked closely enough at the swing characteristics model, which in itself I think is great, and that put aside the deviations induced by different pitch types? Have you observed many guys whose A swing was not their fastest swing?
That's a great question. I haven't looked at that specifically, but I will say I find a lot of squared up balls to that point, not necessarily on their hardest swings. The best example, being a Braves fan, you watch Freddy Freeman do this constantly. He took a lot of swings that were still healthy swings. Like he wasn't letting it rip, but he also wasn't just like flailing and adjusting. It's not like he really got fooled. He set himself up with this swing to be adaptable. Jed Lowry on Rakes and Barrels podcast has been hammering this point lately about guys need to have swings for different types of pitches, and you need to have like a body awareness and like an ability to pitch recognize to know when to just like go let it rip, and then when to kind of take what the pitcher gives you. And yeah, I think it would be wrong to characterize a lot of those taking what the pitcher gives you swings as B swings or even C swings. I think they're competitive attempts to put a ball in play with authority, even if they're not like trying to rip one down the line 400 feet. So
I think if you think about it,
yeah, Stephen Kwan I think is a good example here of like so Quan will let it eat. He can get up to 75 miles an hour. What does he average? Like 64? And yeah, how you characterize his elite bat to ball profile at 64 miles an hour versus mediocre power profile at 75. Yeah, I don't know which one is A technically. They're just different and both valuable.
Yeah, and if you think about like I would probably define the A swing in any given situation as the swing that either maximizes your WOBA or maximizes the team's expected runs, right? And so like in a 2-0 count, swinging as hard as you can probably maximizes your expected WOBA versus like in a 0-2 count, swinging very hard, probably also carries a higher chance of a swing and miss, which has a huge negative penalty on your WOBA. So like yeah, context matters a lot, and where the runners are in base matters a lot, and those are things that are very, very hard to kind of like begin to include in models and stuff like that. But it's definitely something you've seen more. I feel like these a lot of batters having a different swing, for example, in a 2-strike count, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and to tie it into the other topic about arsenal metrics too, I think the pitcher's arsenal matters a whole lot there. I think if a guy knows he's going up there against somebody with multiple pitches that they can land in different spots, he's going to be set up for a different type of swing against a guy. If he's going off a reliever that's got 2 pitches and he's up there like, okay, I'm going to spit on the slider and just look fastball. Like he's going up there like ready to go. And so that's a different, that's not an A swing, B swing. It's just like it's on a spectrum there. So all of that stuff plays into it as well. I definitely think there's guys that there are times where they are set up knowing they're going to adjust. Like there's other times they're see ball, hit ball. There's other times where I'm going to start swinging and be ready to go like as I see it, as it's coming toward the plate. So yeah, all that feeds into it. I completely agree.
You've already tapped into what we've among ourselves speculated V2 of our arsenal metrics could be, which is reward the guy that requires the most number of distinct swings for the batter to cover his whole mix. It's tempting, certainly, and this is the meaty topic of this pod that we want to do, which is we get all these great hitting metrics, and all we're doing is weaponizing them for better pitching research. It makes total sense that we could do this from an Arsenal's approach, but you've already detailed some examples here of how you're turning the new swing path metrics into pitching analytics. So what else speaks to you? I mean, is there new swing data that could come in the next batch here that you think would make material impacts on how you think about pitching?
Yeah, so the biggest one, Mike Petriello has teased this a few times that they are going to release miss distance and direction and stuff. So we're inferring it now. If they have a way of actually measuring that and providing that, that would be huge. Because then a lot of what we're seeing in the models is you've kind of got 2 sets of errors. Your first error is in fitting your swing versus expected, and so trying to figure out what their miss distance was. And then you have an error when you go use that data for another model. That model is going to have its own error. If we can eliminate some of the error in that first portion and they just give us that data, that would be absolutely huge. I do want to say there, I've been critical at times of MLB for what data they provide and don't provide, and whether or not I feel like it's perfectly open. I will say though, the amount of data that they have provided for bat tracking has definitely made me kind of reassess some of my previous criticism and think that maybe there's more to why they do or don't release data than meets the eye, because they've been very open about this stuff, open about what's coming, open about giving us actual data at the pitch level and not just a leaderboard. So shout out to them for that. I did want to plug that real quick. The biggest thing that I've been looking to do with it, the work that I'm hoping to present at Sabre Seminar, is looking at using the miss versus expected data to kind of predict what the batter saw and what influenced what they saw. So trying to see, the first question that I want to ask is how good are they at distinguishing visual information? How well do they see release point? How well do they see the arc of a pitch? How well do they see how far it travels out of hand? And then the last one is how well do they see its velocity coming straight toward them? How well are they able to perceive each of those things individually? And I think we can use this bat data to do that. If we can kind of predict what pitch type is coming based on those inputs, and then kind of compare that to what pitch type it looked like they thought was coming from how they swung, then we can kind of fine tune that model to see, okay, what was influencing it the most. And then the next step of that, once we kind of have an idea of what visual information they're using, then start looking into what prep information influences them. So how much does like knowing what that pitcher throws influence what they expect is coming? How much does what they saw that previous game, that previous at bat, how all of those things influence it as well? So it's already a ton of really good data. I'm already seeing some really interesting stuff in that study. But yeah, I think having more detailed info on where the misses occurred, that would be like the golden piece that would help a ton.
Logistics aside, like obviously, logistics aside, if you had access to, for example, a traject machine, or basically the ability to design any study you wanted to make that would help you more accurately answer these questions, like what do you think would be the biggest piece of information that you could test for that would help us get closer to fully understanding this?
So my thought is I would set up basically a video game where I have a guy stand in the box against different pitchers and have them, whether or not they have a bat or not, have them say whether or not they would swing and what pitch type they thought it was, where they thought it was going to cross the plate. And then I would start doing different things with the traject. I don't know if the traject has the ability to do this, but if I could pick out like a couple different Zach Wheeler fastballs that are identical except for slot, I would kind of like throw a bunch of those and have the batter tell me which one had the higher slot, which one had the lower slot. Try to figure out like, okay, how much slot deviation can they detect? Do different things. Randomly slow down their fastball, but leave the ball flight the same in their field of view, and see like, did you think that was fast? Don't tell them the radar gun, but you have them ask like, was that faster or slower? And just try to figure out like outside of a game setting what sort of information visually they're getting. And then the next thing that I think would be interesting is similar studies, but start priming them with different information. So have them face a pitcher that they've never seen before. Don't tell them a thing about what this guy throws or how they move or anything like that, and see how he does in that game experiment. And then give him another pitcher, and maybe again someone who he's never faced before, but an hour before you do the test or a couple hours before you do the test, have him just 5 minutes. You go over like what pitch types he throws and just like a really high level scouting report. Then run the test and see like how much did that influence it. I think there's a ton of stuff that you could do like that you could iterate very quickly and kind of control the experiment to see what exactly, what information they're able to take in and how they use that in a game setting. With the caveat, of course, one of the most fascinating presentations that I still think about from Saber Seminar last year was one, I think it was from Auburn, where the guy looked at biomechanical data and as it relates to pitch metrics in the lab and then on the field, and then showed that like a lot of what he measured in the lab did not carry over. So I always give that caveat to those that with the using the trajectory or whatever, seeing how well the lab environment does translate to the game environment. But so a caveat there that may not be one-to-one, but still I think there's a ton of experiments you could do related to that.
Yeah, I think that first point you got at with like we can measure with trajectory and everything how much different pitch trajectories literally deviate, but the batter standing 60 feet away from the pitcher and slightly offset, and you've had some good visuals showing the trajectories from the batter's point of view in 2D space, but that batter perception level I think is so key, and we're just making a lot of assumptions now that probably aren't awful, but yeah, being able to measure that, maybe that's something we'll have to get going on the traject. But yeah, we speculate that that Y component is probably the hardest to differentiate from uh, the view of the batter. But in reality, is that the case? I'm not sure.
So seeing that's one of the things tentative as I'm still running the study, but the more I run these studies on like what batters see, I don't think that they are able to distinguish velocity coming right at them very well. I
Yeah.
don't think they do a good job at all. I think they're using mainly trajectory information. Really slow pitches, possibly there. I also think that I think there's probably a biomechanical reason behind why changeups perform best when they're 10 to 15 miles per hour slower than the fastball. And I think that's it. Outside of that band, um, the change in visual angle of that ball coming at you is large enough that you might could distinguish it. I think
Yeah.
within that band, I think they look broadly similar to a batter in the time it takes for them to decide to swing or not. So yeah, I
I think
completely.
Yeah, the points you brought up too, I think can be further, I guess, complicated or enforced with if you have this super slow pitch, it likely is lobbed in with a very high vertical release angle. So is it the Y component or that release angle that they're seeing? Then also certain changeups, Heshka, something we've talked about is it'd be really cool to have arm speed data because can they differentiate a changeup that's 20 miles an hour slower because it's 20 miles an hour slower, or is it because the pitcher literally slowed down their delivery and the hitter's telling it that way? And getting at your point with customer feedback, I don't even know what the hitter would say, and it may not be what they're actually visually taking in.
Yeah,
Yeah, no
everybody
doubt.
tells you they can see spin, and then you go study this, and you're like, I don't know. That's a perfect example of that, where it's like, I saw the spin of the slider, and it's like, I believe you saw something. I'm not sure how much that influenced your swing decision.
Yeah.
That's why you need brainwave data.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I would definitely, if you could have like gaze tracking and stuff like that while you're doing those experiments too, I think that would be huge. And have vary the background. You have a black drop cloth and then have a green one, or then have one with like trees on it. Stuff like that too would be, yeah. What's actually going on in their head between the eyes?
Yeah, and I wonder if you'd be able to like notice a difference between the elite, like an elite group, right? Like if we have pro guys in the off season versus college guys versus like our academy guys, like
Yeah.
what do they do differently? And are these ranges of recognition drastically different? I'm assuming the range of recognition, like the minimum amount to be noticed for the elite group would be much smaller than, for example, like a youth group or a high school college group. Like it's almost like the increased skill basically allows you to like it's not I think part of it is also just like more practice, more reps at recognizing these differences. But I also think like, for example, like you think about a guy with faster bat speed, he doesn't have to swing till later. So he actually has more time. And so that increased skill allows him to gather more information before he starts his actual bat swing. So I'd be really curious to see what the results of these would be. I think we could probably try to cook something up, but I'm definitely intrigued by your ideas.
Well, gaze tracking is kind of a polarizing thing within Driveline, from what I understand. We've made a run at it before, and I know maybe we've come
was-
along with the technology that we would need for it. But
Yeah, the original study we did, I believe, if you look it up, it's Andrew Wright, our assistant director of hitting, as a 22-year-old in the cage with yeah, it was just super clunky. We've played around with the idea of doing it. Hypothetically, you could passively measure it if you estimated. You couldn't do gaze tracking, but you could basically find the center of their forehead and figure out where it was pointed, and then match that up with trajectory data to see where their forehead's pointed at different points in time. That'd be the least invasive way to do it to get better gaze tracking data. We've looked into it. There's not a great pairing of like a cheap option for something that is not critical to the business, because yeah, we can't spend a bunch of money to. Maybe there will come a time when we do prioritize it, but yeah, have looked into it previously, not pursued it seriously in a while.
That stuff's
Last,
tough too, because in doing some of the like reading research for some of the arsenal metrics and the gaze tracking, there your brain and your eyes have like multiple different methods of like how they can acquire information. And it's not always clear which processes they are using at what times. So like one interesting one is your body, your eyes can determine depth by binocular reception. So how the view in one eye differs from the other eye. It is not clear yet in the studies that I've seen, I think, whether or not that is like uh, good enough, fast enough for batters to use that like in real time. And so that's what makes some of this stuff, we have a lot of really good optical research in lab settings of like how eyes work, but how they work in a dynamic setting oftentimes differs, and how they work for trained professionals may be different as well. Maybe they've figured out, their brains have figured out that they can rely more on one process or another, and that's just out of my wheelhouse, but it kind of speaks to the complexity of doing some of this stuff. It's hard to tell exactly what they're doing and how.
And I almost think breaking it down into like testing out binocular vision, like kind of isolating that effect or isolating. There's a variable that we've looked at called tau in some of our motor learning stuff, which is like basically how long the brain expects an object to, or like how long it would take an object to reach you. Basically, it's called tau. And so like testing out these variables in isolation and like kind of like building up from the foundational concepts rather than just jumping straight to like some more complex or more nuanced like ability of like hitting a ball or something like that, but like trying to isolate these I think might be a decent way of approaching it too.
I have one last gripe on this topic, which is way richer than I ever considered. But I just can't believe that we're still at the point in time where putting glasses on a guy yields meaningful performance gains. Like Muncie and Sean Murphy this year were guys that put on rec specs and then all of a sudden could hit. It floors me that we're not screening for this, by the time the guy is 10 years old. But maybe you can take a look at how those guys come up in your study, because
Even when vision is not the issue, haven't you worn rec specs without lenses at some point in your career, just for vibes to be dialed?
Yeah, so I think the one thing we're missing from our stuff models is like the intimidation feature. And so like wearing goggles is definitely a plus 10 intimidation. And so yeah, there was a time where I scratched the lenses of my goggles, didn't realize till right before I was about to go in the game, and instead of taking them off like a normal person, I just popped out the lenses and wore the empty frame. So it's had to maintain that plus 10 intimidation.
So they need goggles, need to wear the high pants, throw underarm, and then yeah, what walk-up song we got this year? I know you typically have some spice.
Yeah, this year I've been going with some J Beebs. Though I'm honestly considering changing it to Hawaiian Roller Coaster Ride from Lilo and Stitch. So we'll see if my heart takes me in that direction.
Yeah, reading Pennsylvania, notoriously very Hawaiian. And
whoa. Reading,
wherever you are. I don't know where you are.
Reading,
yeah, okay. There you go.
It looks like reading, right, well, pronounced Reading.
I should get better at reading city names. Or reading glasses, as fitting with the topic here. But
tie it all together.
Last couple things here. One, I'm quite content that the notion of decay has pretty solidly entered the broader discourse around pitching analytics. I think it's obviously something that a lot of us have worked to socialize, and Lance especially putting a lot of content along these lines certainly helps. But the decay concept comes with the corollary of buyback, which I think is still a much harder thing to model. Something that we're obviously working on internally, without having to get into a ton of specifics, because we are in an arms race against each other to some degree. How does the notion of buyback fit within the Arsenal modeling that you're doing? How are you conceiving of the idea? What are your approaches to that idea?
So there's kind of like two things there that kind of give a little bit of background on some of our research here and kind of how I approach this. Um, so I had a piece earlier this year looking at the time through the order penalty and whether it was fatigue versus familiarity. I found that familiarity was the much larger portion, but also found that that could be split into two components. There is a batter's familiarity with the given pitch type, and then there's the batter's familiarity with the pitcher. And so I think there's kind of two paths of learning that's going on. Right now in our Arsenal metrics, we are considering how trajectories compare to the other trajectories within that pitcher's arsenal. And then we kind of use that to give the probability that a batter would expect a given pitch type. And that pitch type probability is what informs the rest of the metrics: surprise factor, movement spread, velocity spread. But with those, there is some assumption that the batter knows what's in that pitcher's arsenals and kind of knows their movement against one another, or at least that knowledge influences the results, whether or not it's fully internalized. But those assumptions that the batter, one, knows that pitcher's pitch types, movements, and how their fastball looks relative to the league, and then that the batter knows how to distinguish that pitcher's offerings from one another, how to distinguish their slider from their fastball. Those are related, but somewhat distinct. And so I think understanding what influences buyback requires first fully understanding what influences the decay in and of itself. So is it them getting used to their fastball movement, or is it them getting used to picking their fastball from the changeup? To give an example, if it's primarily them learning how that guy's fastball moves, it may be really tough to like dislodge that learning. I don't know. This section is purely speculation, but it could be that that's something that kind of sticks with a guy for a little bit longer, knowing like, okay, his fastball's got a little bit more hop on it. I figured out if I just try to swing like I'm hitting the top of the ball, that gets me there. And he can get that in his head, remember it, and that may be very sticky. If what he instead is learning is how to distinguish the fastball from the slider, I could see that knowledge decaying much more quickly, especially if you can tunnel well those other pitches. And so if you can tunnel your fastball off of your slider, I think it's going to help those play against each other and keep the batter from being able to detect what's coming. But there could be some amount of, if they've seen your fastball this often, this amount, then they're going to be able to hit it well if they can see it coming. So you may not be able to like buy back a lot of that decay, but you could buy back some of their ability to detect your pitches. So that's kind of like where I'm at with it, is trying to understand which of those pathways are influencing the decay as much as possible. And then I do think there's an element of just varying things around. If you've got different things that you can throw to different quadrants, like, against Strider, it's really hard to tell the slider from the fastball, but that's all you've got to tell. And if you've got some way to determine that, then you're good. Other guys, if you can vary that, have more pitches in the mix, I think that's going to make it harder. The other thing that I've kind of thought about, a lot of the Arsenal metrics now, when we present them, we'll present them for each of the offerings in a pitcher's arsenal and then like averaged as a whole. But there could be guys that have like a couple distinct sub arsenals. And so it's like, I've got this cutter slider combo that I play off one another, but then I've also got this sinker changeup combo that I play off another. And I don't try to play my sinker off of my slider. I've tried to play it off my changeup. And so like, I've kind of got two different things going on there. And I think there could be something like that, where if you could give a guy a different look, not just a different, location, different type, but also like a whole different set of like tunnels with like different types within that tunnel, I think that can throw guys off too. Just all of that just makes it a whole lot harder to game plan, and then it makes that knowledge less sticky, I would say. Is my, again, speculating there, but that's my assumption.
Steven, I got a baseball savant page for you to check out after this podcast. You need to look at 2022 Ralph Garza Jr. Those are your different arsenals. Technically through 6 pitches, but lefties and righties, completely different pitcher.
Uh,
Yeah,
I
I
forget
think
who's been saying it lately, but somebody, they always say that like every pitcher is actually two pitchers. They're themselves versus righties and themselves versus lefties, and that's undoubtedly true.
yeah, kind of the way
Oh,
we think about it. We've discussed previously in like pitch design philosophically. What are we trying to do? Is like there's this grid of pitchability where versus lefties and righties, you need to be able to zone a pitch that's not going to get crushed and get a chase out of the zone and something to get whiffs. If you can fill up those boxes against lefties and righties, you're likely going to be pretty effective. And hoping to talk more on that at a Saber seminar this year.
Do we think lefty versus righty should be the only delineation? I guess it's like the most discrete one, right? Like you can't, like,
Yeah.
for example, if you have like steep swing versus flat swing, even within righties, that's more of like a continuous spectrum. So I guess it's like harder to truly delineate. But I wonder if there's anything where like any true like delineations we're missing just from. But I don't know, just something to think about.
I think different game states are different
Hmm.
ones as well, and I think that was one thing that I like tried like hell to fit that into the Arsenal models. The idea of like guys having different tools for different situations, and I couldn't find a way of measuring that like really improved model outcomes. But I think there's guys that they've got a set of pitches that they go for when they need the ground ball, and that is a like they are a distinct, they truly are a different pitcher in situations when they need a ground ball versus when they need a strikeout, and how like their entire approach changes. And so, yeah, I agree. There's tons of different ways. You know, left right is the easiest one, as you said, but there's a lot of other ways as well.
well, and the way you merge decay and buyback is you have a different arsenal each time through the order, certainly, because you could. One strategy that I've advocated for is be stuff dominant heavy first time through. Just keep as small an arsenal, as few number of pitch types as possible, to get through whatever, one or one and a half times through the order. Save the like you know bad changeup that you would never throw otherwise, until you need to lengthen your outing and get some variation in there and broaden the mix basically as you go through. So yeah, just another axis that I think again merges these concepts quite nicely.
To that point too, I think your best stuff is often the stuff you can be most aggressive with, and I would think like to reduce decay as much as possible, you want them to see as few pitches as possible the first time through. So if you've got stuff that you can zone with authority and like trust it there, then you're going to throw fewer pitches. They're going to get less familiar with you, and then it just like opens up your possibilities the next time through.
Well, we could go on forever about this particular topic, but let's wrap it with this last one. Yeah, the three of us Driveline guys could go on forever about this topic, but what more when we throw you in the mix? But to close it out here, GM guy, day job guy, racing is on your LinkedIn. I noticed. So, how is racing being moneyballed, and is baseball ahead of yet another sport in how we're applying an analytic approach to winning games?
It's interesting. So, racing, if you get into racing, it's really broad. So there are a ton of weekend racers at dirt tracks in the South, at autocross events, at, little specky 30 events, spec Miata events. There's a ton of racing out there. And what you see at the highest levels is it has already been like very data dominant for a long time. And it's because the currency is lap times, and that is so you get direct feedback, and especially if you have like track telemetry, you can see like where you were fastest and stuff like that. They are very good at finding inefficiencies and stuff like that. The other thing is People complain about the regulations in racing, and I think there's arguments to be made for or against. I will say some of the regulations kind of force teams to be more creative. And with forcing you to be creative, constraints kind of breed, thinking creatively and thinking through inefficiencies. And so a lot of that's kind of been baked in. And at the lower levels is actually kind of hard to moneyball it, because outside of pros, one of the most important things you can do to make a car faster is make the driver more comfortable in that car. And a lot of the stuff that like makes a driver comfortable may be hard to quantify. It's going to come down to like what they feel, how they like the car set up. And so that's an area where it can be tough, where like, this setup really might not be optimal if you had Kimi Räikkönen driving the car, but you don't. You have your cousin Jerry driving your car this weekend, and like he likes it set up like this, and he's going to be faster if it's set up like that. So it's tough. I will say, though, one area that I do think could be better moneyballed is in production cars. There are a lot of companies still that are overly reliant on not just professional, but at times enthusiast feedback for certain segments of vehicles. And one thing that has humbled me working in my job is how a driving professional evaluates a car is often very different from how like the average customer evaluates a car. And I kind of think of like some of the professional feedback almost like scouting feedback, where like, they've got a point, they are seeing something, but it may not necessarily like be applicable to this situation. And that is an area where you really got to come with data. When people come to me and say like, well, I thought the car felt better when it drove like this. I always like, I appreciate your feedback. I will log that. I will note it. However, I am going to go with the data on this and go with a broader sample. So yeah, I actually think the production side could use more Moneyball. There's still companies that like how they do steering feel is like they've got this guy that knows steering feel and they drove the car and they said it feels good. And like that's it. Like, okay. So yeah, definitely a lot of applications there.
Oh, real versus feel permeates everything in our lives. So all right. Well, I think I've gotten through all our stuff. Jack, Josh, anything before we close it out?
Thanks
I know
for
this doesn't
Stephen
fall
getting
in your.
on.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming. And I know this doesn't fall in your department, but bring back CarPlay for GM vehicles. That's all I'm going to say.
You see, CarPlay's grown. They want everything. We've seen some companies back out of the new CarPlay Ultra. So
Yeah, I know. It's a bummer.
Yeah, more
It's all right.
vague and angry feedback or survey feedback data coming over the podcast this time.
Right. Yeah. I do want
good
to
stuff.
while I got it. I want to plug Sabre Seminar. If you haven't bought tickets, I got to hang out with y'all a lot last year. Obviously, we always tout this a great opportunity if you're looking to break into baseball. There's lots of teams there. There's the opportunity to have folks spread your work online. But also, if you just enjoy this stuff and love talking shop and talking ball, I went last year just as a fan. I went at part of B-Pro, but just went, I didn't have anything to present. I wasn't helping the team out with anything for setup. I just went and talked with people, and it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. So definitely encourage anybody, if you're interested in baseball, love talking about these topics, come by. The event is great, and everyone there is super personable, love to talk about this stuff. It goes for hours. So if you haven't bought your tickets, look online. It's coming up this summer in August. So we'd love to see folks out there.
Definitely echo that. Conversations are awesome there. A bunch of people all interested in the same stuff. And I will say, from a hiring perspective, Marek, we interviewed 15 people over the weekend. Our current intern was one that is from SaberSem. So definitely the most valuable conversations I think you can have if you're trying to break into the industry, or just, a fan wanting to talk shop.
Yeah. Go to SaberSem, get a Driveline job, and then feature as a guest on the Driveline R&D pod. It's a most cynical way of putting it. All right. Good stuff. Thanks, guys.